May 20, 2023. Well, I want to address the issue of the so-called UAP subject in a different way. I mean, the last video I addressed this, and I was talking about kind of a readout on what happened at a Senate committee hearing on it and kind of my thoughts. But I'd kind of also address the subject in general. Historically, I think I did a fairly lengthy video at one time on the subject, as to kind of how I come to my opinions on it and kind of where I am on the subject. Um, this whole thing, of course, is probably kind of a really old subject. I mean, there have been historically reports of strange things in the sky that go back centuries. And certainly, even in the 1890s, there was a lot of discussion of airships of mysterious origin flying over. And there are individuals that have claimed sightings that certainly predate the 1947 uh, emergence of what we now think of as flying saucers, and later renamed UFOs, and now UAP. But and of course 47 was a big breakthrough year on it with the uh, Kenneth Arnold sighting. And then there were a whole bunch of others, and then of course the Twining memo, which is an important historical document in this because it issued as a secret document. Now, not it wasn't code word, it wasn't compartment, it was just a general secret document. General Twining, at the time the commander of what was then called the Air Materiel Command, now it's called Air Force Systems Command at Wright-Patterson, basically responded to a question from a general in the Pentagon about what to think about the subject. And he basically says, yes, this is real. He describes what they are, the characteristics of them, and then mysteriously states that they actually lack any specific concrete material evidence in the forms of crash debris, which would validate the absolute reality of it. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's a very important historic memo on the subject because this particular individual, of course, eventually became a full four-star general, was the first Air Force officer to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So you can't get much more credible in the military than that, I guess. And obviously, the position when he said this is something that's real and not fictitious or a visionary or something to that effect is a very important statement. And what's interesting is that if you go back, this is a few months after the famed Roswell incident. And if in fact there was an actual crash of an anomalous object at that time, as has been reported in many stories, uh, it's reported that the crash debris was in fact taken to Wright-Patterson for evaluation. He being the commander of that base and that would probably at that stage would have been involved in it. In fact, there's even some evidence. You go into, if you follow Richard Dolan, who really does a lot of good history on the whole subject in a pretty rational way, I think. Um, I would say one of the best on the subject, really, trying to keep it rational and not getting off into Never Never Land. And essentially, it would seem that there's some missing time on his agenda around the time of the Roswell incident, which suggests that he made a trip there. Oh, that's not confirmed, but it's sort of suggestive. So, and so that's kind of how this song begins. And then you go into a period after that where there was a major, you know, uh, effort after. Well, first of all, he actually had requested a formal code word study be made called Project Sign, which evaluated the best cases they had at the time, and his experts, they're led by a full colonel there in their intelligence division, concluded that these things were, as they said at the time, quote, interplanetary. And this document apparently went up to the Pentagon and the top people there, General Vandenberg, and they rejected this conclusion and supposedly ordered the document destroyed. And at that point, they replaced Project Sign with Project Grudge, and 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 basically decided that to basically say explain everything away, and they put a first lieutenant in charge of the project. So you've got an team of experts led by a full colonel saying there's something real, and then you have a new project led by a first lieutenant saying it's unreal, it's all weather balloons, the planet Venus, and some weird atmospheric disturbance. And so you go through this weird period, and I think this early period is very illustrative because at the time, I think the government itself was kind of coming to grips with what position they were going to take on the subject, and different factions had different attitudes toward it. And so what came out of this? This was going on for some time with this Project Grudge and the disinformation approach, and then an interesting incident happens. A new head of Air Force intelligence, a General Cabell, who later became the deputy director of the CIA, and in fact, was involved with the Bay of Pigs and was fired by President Kennedy over the Bay of Pigs. But that's late. That's years later, in 1961. But at this time, around 1952, he's at a radar station of the Air Force, and they're observing an object that's traveling way faster than any of the aircraft traveled at that time. Because I mean, in '52, other than some experimental aircraft, everything was subsonic, I think, pretty much. And so this thing was going supersonic, and they had the technicians check out the equipment to see if it was malfunctioning or anything, and to conclude it wasn't. And so then he went to this Project Grudge and said, "What is going on with this garbage you're putting out? I mean, we need to have a real study." And that's when Captain Ruppelt, who had a degree in aeronautical engineering, I believe it was put in charge of it and conducted for about 18 months a scientific-based study of these things, and explained away a lot of them, but also come up with a large number of really interesting cases that were unknown, and actually pretty much was recommending, as good as a person who wanted to have a career, could afford to do it at the rank of just captain, that these things ought to be taken real. Well, that didn't work out too good for them ultimately, because although they had a gigantic set of UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. in 1952, there was a lot of hullabaloo about that, which brought this to the foreground. What happens then is that the CIA gets involved, and they bring a group led by a Dr. Robertson, who I believe is the Robertson, Robertson Walker, a solution cosmological model, which is, if you know any general relativity, that it's that guy, it's top notch, and they basically have the mission of debunking the whole thing and suggesting that we basically launch a disinformation campaign using modern terminology to suppress all this stuff. And so, this was not based in any way on any particular evaluation of fact. It was just it was obviously done. Whether the people on the panel really believed what they said, or were simply ordered to do it and knew what was going on, or who knows. But the point is, after that, that's when the government policy that has endured for many decades was put in place to go back to completely suppressing information, explaining this away, and actually took a variety of steps that made it dangerous for a commercial airline pilot to report anything like this. There were regulation changes that were made that would really suppress reports. It's quite clear they were trying to get this out of the public as much as possible, and to come out very heavily with the word there's really nothing to see here. And that's why the stigma that they're now in the new process that's come forward since 2017, and with the formation of the Arrow Group and all this that's going on now, the laws that Congress has passed on it, which are really revolutionary in this subject, by the way, this is a stigma that they're trying to, overcome. And the other thing to consider in all this is that the advocates of this subject, the people that the experiencers or the people that have seen them. Well, most of them are okay, but there's a group of people that have just really, really wild stories. Who knows? But they're so wild and so many contradictory things that it almost supplements the government's historic disinformation campaign, but by the phenomena itself doing this. So anyway, I think this is the problem that we have right now of overcoming this subject, and trying to get through the years of secrecy and get to the truth of the matter. And that's why I think that Congress is having trouble, and the Arrow Group itself probably is having trouble, because who knows? I'm sure there's prevailing prejudices inside the command structure of the Pentagon and intelligence community that's against this whole subject. So anyway, I just kind of want to run through all this and kind of give you kind of my general attitude on this, and kind of put a little history of how we kind of came to be where we are on this. The early history is very illustrative of explaining why we're where we are today. So anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. We'll post this on Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below.